welcome. I can't see if it's working. Looks like it's working. All right. The intro at the very beginning might be a little messed up, but hopefully not. We will just go with it, though. Again, this is episode 725 of Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido. Here again tonight with Jen, the Arcane Observer, my co-host for the show. And we're going to continue our series on alien abductions. And all these things that may be connected to that, and throughout the past. Now, that's sort of where we're going with these episodes here, is talking about sort of these similarities between modern-day alien abductions and other abductions from other beings in the past that have been reported. So this came from last weekend shows, and found a few articles. I'll put in the episode description, but just want to keep on that conversation. So again, thank you all for being here, and Jen, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, to be here.
Yeah, last weekend was a lot of fun. Those two shows that we did, and I think it leads very well into this topic and going into the whole idea of all the different fae or fairy or all the different names that they go by, that whole realm of sort of experiences and encounters, and even abductions in some cases. So I know you're a little more familiar with that subject as far as the fae goes than I am. So I don't know if you want to start, and then we can go from there. Also, Logan says hello.
Oh, Logan. How's she doing?
She is active. She is, she's walking around meowing, so apparently she wants to be heard. But anyway, you're welcome to keep on going, and she'll be fine.
Well, one neat thing about the avenue with the fairies and the idea about I guess the elementals, I don't know. I think those are a little different. I mean, sometimes those are tied together, but what was really, I think that what's really cool and kind of interesting is they have the duality with the fairies. Usually people are just kind of thinking about sort of the natural fairies, like this sort of very positive tone on it. But you have both, representing you have both dualities. You have the different, you have kind of a darker area of the talk about the fairies, and you have more of a positive. So that's interesting too. And it kind of emulates a lot of the, I don't know, the Jinn lore and everything with genies and things like that, where there's sort of this, like in the case of the Jinn and the genies, that they have families, they have generations, they have many dualities, gender dualities. They have just they're like people. They're kind of temperamental, and it could go either way. So it's the same thing with people. It's the same thing with the way that they interpret the genie, but they're a different type of species, a different type of entities altogether, really. So I think that's really interesting when thinking about it. But then applying that to whatever people are experiencing through abduction stories, I've heard of the idea of fairies kind of hooking up with human beings. I've heard of that. I've heard of the same thing with the Jinn. There can be a crossover in some way. And the same thing with ghosts, I've heard of that. And I've heard of it in the case of with aliens too, which might be, are they the same thing? Because if we were to think that aliens are a new thing kind of coming on the scene, a new species coming on the scene, it might just be another term for the same thing. But you see it too with even the angel lore, which I think is really kind of interesting. Like there were stories about some of the fallen angels taking wives, at least in some of the Jewish texts, which is really interesting. That how would that even happen? But they even have children, and there are generations of them. And you have the idea of even these other species of, I guess you'd call them humans, but they're not classified as humans. They're just hominids, So I don't know. I think that it could be any number of things going on with the abduction stories and why, but it's against, there's a willingness and then there's the unwillingness concept. Like in some cases, the person is an unwilling participant in the abduction experience. And a lot of times these happen from a young age. People start to experience these abduction scenarios at a young age. They encounter them. And that can be said too with the fairy lore, and I mean, in some cases, even the jinn and the angelic lore, where they've been seeing or encountering this for a long time, usually from childhood. Not always, but oftentimes. And it goes on their whole life. And sometimes it goes on generationally, as if it's a generational lineage experience that goes on, where maybe the grandmother or grandfather experience something that then is experienced by the parents, that's then experienced by the child. It kind of just goes on and on, like some sort of a, I don't know, like a, if you would call it some sort of maybe a continuance of some type of agreement from some ancient, past or something. I have no idea why that would be, but I have ideas about that too. We should get to that sometime. So, that some people are related to like a generational curse, where people have this ongoing experience that comes and visits their own children, so to speak.
Right. And I've even heard in some, going back to the whole alien encounter thing, when people have tried to talk to the aliens or whatever they are, and again, I say alien as everyone that has listened to the show knows now, to me, alien just means unfamiliar, unknown. I don't claim to know where they're from, or if there are any sort of beings that have multiple names. I think that's always a possibility. Just as it's a case where there's probably some beings that have different names that are different, that just appear similar. But I've heard that when people have had experiences, they've sort of they've said or asked, "Why are you doing this?" Or they've said, "Don't do this," or "Leave me alone," and you have no right to do this. And the response has been, "Yes, we do. We have all the rights, or we have whatever rights we need," or sort of like an idea of, again, some kind of agreement from before, maybe, that the current person is not even aware of, unfortunately, in those cases. The other thing about this too is there's still people have experiences. I've shared a few of them on the show over the years where they go into parks or into forests or into woods, and everything starts to look different, and maybe they'll even see an older rundown building, and everything will feel weird, and they may even see a figure that's watching them, and it may be a shorter figure, it may not be, and time will feel different, and they'll decide to back up and go back the way they came, and then as soon as they get back to a certain point, everything feels normal again. Excuse me. And so I wonder if those are sort of near abductions or near situations where people got into an area where maybe they weren't supposed to be, and they were the sort of the lucky ones in a way to wander in and out of an area where maybe these other beings exist. And again, who knows how many stories we don't hear about where people vanish and then they reappear or they don't. It's really hard to know because, especially going back throughout time, if someone vanishes and it's in a remote enough area and they don't have a lot of sort of close loved ones that they're really connected to, they could just vanish and then no one really might even ever know until much later.
Right. I mean, the idea of the Seelie and the Unseelie court. That's basically the two dualities in the whole story, at least with like fairy tales and things like that. The Seelie court being kind of benevolent towards humans, representing the more positive sides of nature, and the Unseelie court representing the more negative aspects. And at one point, it was all one court system, essentially. Like, this was all one organized group of entities. And then there was a disagreement about how they would interact with humanity, about how that was where a lot of the stories talk about, and many of the old fairy tale books and things like that, which were heavily documented at the turn of the century. Very seriously documented in a way, because they were trying to kind of gather up all of these old, I guess you'd call them anthropologists, would be a better way to put it. I don't think they were titled that way at the time, but they were kind of just researchers and authors. And the interviews they would have with some of these rural communities, but basically any community at the time, a sort of, not religion per se, but like a belief system, a faith, so I guess a type of religion, where there were still offerings being made to both courts or to both types, and a sort of reverence about these entities. Many of the modern churches that came up, by modern I mean the first churches of organized religion, were built on these sites and locations where they had to build them for the miracles to occur. So some of the unusual occurrences that would happen, say like a moving statues or just faith-based miracles of sorts, I don't know how else we would describe it, would only occur at these particular locations that had already been used repeatedly throughout, as long as oral history was carrying it, where they would go to pay reverence to these entities. And so the churches were built in those locations because that's where the people were going. And that's where the miracles were occurring. There was one story of a church, I can't remember, because I don't ever bring anything to these, like when I come in to just talk with you, I just come in to talk with you, but there was one story in particular I remember hearing about, and it was, I think, in Wales, that they had there was a church, and there was I think it was some type of it was a statue of kind that people were worshiping, or not worshiping, I guess worshiping as in giving reverence to, that people would go in front of and make requests or want to commune or be near to loved ones, or thought that there was some type of transference of information, that it could be a messenger of sorts between the living and the dead, and making petitions for help in many cases. And when they tried to move that statue and to a church in Rome, and the statue went right back to where it was, is so the story goes. And this sort of thing would happen with it, till eventually they just left it where it was, and in this remote location, they went ahead and built one of the churches there. So I think that's really interesting. But as far as the exchange occurring between humanity and this, I guess you'd call it like a species, or some type of temperamental race, or I don't know. The people report having all kinds of interactions with them. The abduction experience itself, though, as far as like you were saying, of them coming near to a location where time is affected, or their perception of time, or their perception, actually sometimes literally time, like clocks would stop and things like that in vehicles, but I don't know, mostly it seems to do a lot with just the perception of everything shifting. And I don't know, a lot of people who do the paranormal investigations and things like that will relay this sort of phenomenon. People who are doing cyclical research and things like that. And they'll sometimes attune it to maybe it's underwater, it's water under the earth moving, which is everywhere. But, something to that effect. There's some kind of reason specifically at this location. There's a more powerful magnetic field at this location.
Right.
There's something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of these, that makes sense with a lot of these places, that they'd have magnetic fields, they'd have water running under them. I mean, everywhere it does, but I mean, maybe closer to the surface, maybe in some places. But yeah, it's really wild how there's so many types of encounters, and some are abductions, some are more just encounters, and people do vanish and then come back and they're fine. They don't have there was no negative experience, but then when they get back, they do realize that time has passed differently while they were away, and even in some cases, they had people looking for them and could not find them in an area where people knew they were at, and so yeah, there's all these different things, all these different levels experiences. The objects moving and back to one place. That's amazing because statues. I mean, I hear all the time and read about people having experiences with small objects there that appear and vanish and that kind of thing. But that's a statue, and that's something else I think would be maybe a good show to do at some point, is just the weirdness around some statues, because there's a lot of that as well, even in modern day, as far as in cemeteries as well, or graveyards. Weird stories around statues there. But yeah, it's even with stones in places where people feel weird when they get around certain stones or rocks in areas too. So not even statues, just natural features in the land, which is always amazing as well.
They call it aports.
Right.
Aports, where objects wind up somewhere, like on a roof. You see it. They talk about it oftentimes in poltergeist experiences. That's where I've heard about that term was in poltergeist experiences, where people were reporting that, and in possession cases, where the person has been completely. So that's why too with the abduction experience, I think there's something, in my mind anyway, that kind of ties into possession too. Because I've always been fascinated by that, and willing possession. At one point in time, there were willing participants, and it was sort of an honor to be possessed. Like, not in the case the way that we think about it today in the horror movies and things like that.
Right.
They saw it as sort of a lining up of something where they were used as a vessel in a way, and they would do a lot of rituals to actually try to have it occur, but it was always by the choice of the entity who it would possess, so to speak, and it would give certain attributes to the village or to the people in that area by that person having, and it would sometimes be limited, like it would only be during the duration of that ritual or whatever when they were communing with these entities. But it's really interesting when it comes to the negative experiences people have, where it seems that there's something they can't shake off of that, and the same with possession too. Maybe it could be tied in somehow to some sort of the dedications and the human sacrifice aspect is really fascinating with this, or that the person somehow has been dedicated. See, I think that they used to have, from what I can understand, they would, the same with baptisms, there would be a dedication of a child to a particular deity. The child would be initiated and dedicated to serve that deity in a way. And in some cases, it goes even further than that with a lot of these stories, that it could become a generational scenario where for so many lives they continue to serve that deity. And so I think that there could be something with that. But as far as like the abduction experiences themselves and what people report is sometimes just so off the wall. But even the breeding programs people talk about, I think there's some ground for the levity of that type of conversation. For example, I've heard about the troglodons, like the concept of the cave-dwelling species that are existing Agartha under the earth, but they were these first species. It's almost like a vampire story, essentially. But that they could only have like one offspring. And during these wars, but imagine like the hominids and the Neanderthals and this sort of the Homo sapien, Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon man, in these types of incidences, that they could only have, sometimes they weren't prolific, but they could live for like almost immortally. In some of these stories, they're talking about them living like 900 years, or even longer, but sometimes shorter. They weren't immortal. They just had exceptionally long lives and could still be mortally wounded, and could die from those injuries. But imagine if you were to have a species that had an offspring that during one of these wars, the only offspring they ever had was killed. And the Jinn are notorious for this vengeance, sort of a, what do you call that? Not just vengeance, but and not just holding a grudge, but just the revenge aspect of it, or continuing a curse upon a bloodline due to such a grudge.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yep, just a grudge. And they're notorious for stories like that, particularly the female Jinn. So, like, it's really interesting about that. That sometimes maybe there's something to do with that even. It's so, in theory, and taking it all as if it is true, just to open up the door of conversation about all the possibilities in this lore. I kind of think of it like that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking now too of any kind of channeling or possession, and then comparing that to when people have experiences with partners or loved ones where they wake up in their bedroom and they see something weird, and they try to wake up whoever else is in the room with them, and they cannot wake them up. And you hear that over and over again in experiences. One person will be seeing something weird, and the other person will just be, it's like an unnatural sleep. And now I'm wondering, is that other person that is in that unnatural sleep, is that some kind of a excuse me, an abduction experience in a way, or a possession in a way, where it's not the physical body that's being sort of taken away. It's more of the essence or the spirit or the consciousness excuse me, of that person that is temporarily not even in their body, which is why they can't be brought, they can't be woken up at the time. And you hear about that, and even I've heard accounts and read accounts of people who have been trying to wake the person up, and that person will be saying weird things in a different language, or just things that nonsensical words or sounds, or English, and they'll be saying weird things just about how they don't want to wake up, or just all different kinds of things there. So yeah, I think there's a lot more to abduction than just a physical sense, and I think we should probably do a show at some point on sort of channeling and or possession as well. That's probably something we should cover later on at some point too. We have maybe about a minute left, Jen, if you have anything else you want to add before this episode ends.
I think it would be great to cover possession and channeling. It's a huge topic, and it's not talked about often because of the terror it invokes. But there are actually different faith systems that intentionally pursue just that, not just the channeling, but to literally be christened with the possession. In fact, a very popular religion, Christianity, even talks a great deal about that, to be literally possessed with it. So it's very fascinating. It's an ancient religion, really. I think it is. At least with the Bacchus religions and Dionysus, and just the concepts there, that there's some type of connection there in a way, maybe. Or that it's a parallel to it. But yes, we should definitely talk about possession and channeling sometime. That'd be incredible.
Well, we'll put that on the... Sorry, yeah, we'll put that on the plan for future shows and do that. Well, thank you for being on the show with me, gentlemen. I close out here in a second, and talk to you soon again, real soon again.
Thank you, James.
And everyone, thank you for being here and listening in. And yeah, we're going to continue this conversation in the next episode. And I think we definitely have to do some shows on again, channeling and our possession. And all just the things, that's the nice thing about these shows, is they lead to other topics that we can cover later. And hopefully that never ends. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next time on Salsido Paranormal. Take care.